Hello, this is Pastor Don and Donna Long, and here we are with another session at Grafted in our special series where we're talking about Israel and the Middle East, what's going on, so you can have some understanding of, who's right, who's wrong, how should the Middle East work out. I hope you've enjoyed this series. Let me know if you have. Donna, last week we ended talking about the Six-Day War.
Yes.
The fact that in 1967 Israel was surrounded by Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, all pledged total destruction.
That's right.
They said it was going to be a war of annihilation. They were going to destroy every Jew. There's no declaration of war that needs to be said when you've said this is what we're going to do. They kicked out the UN peacekeepers, massed their troops, closed the Straits of Tehran. All of these are acts of war, and how even though they had superiority in numbers, how a miracle happened.
Yes.
In 6 days, Israel won that war. In 6 days, they destroyed the entire Egyptian and Syrian air forces. They had gained the whole of the Sinai, all of what we now know as the West Bank, and all of the Golan Heights.
Yep.
And the only reason the war stopped was because the United States and Russia were concerned that if they continued and got into Egypt and into Damascus, then Russia was going to get involved, and now the United States and Russia would be at war. And so the Arabs were like being totally wiped out, and now we need the United Nations to help. Now we need peace, because we threatened to kill you, but now you're beating us up. Excuse me. Let's see who did what to whom. Now here's what's interesting. We close by talking about the fact that Israel gave the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt.
That's right.
That's unheard of.
That's right.
That's unheard of. Your enemy attacks you, you take over their land, you don't turn around the next day and say, here, we give it back to you.
It doesn't sound like the description of what we're hearing nowadays, that Israel doesn't want peace.
Yeah,
it's like,
so, and by the way, it also is evidence that land for peace doesn't work.
No,
that was a tremendous amount of land that they gave for peace.
And they weren't even being pressured. They
That's
just
right.
gave it willingly.
They gave the whole Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt,
That's right.
and see, that's just like preposterous. But what they did keep, they kept the Golan Heights. And you described last week how the Golan Heights is a strategic, important place for several reasons. Number one, and you got to go to Israel with us, we'll show you this. Anybody who stands in the Golan Heights and looks down on Israel below you will realize you never, ever, ever, ever want to give up the Golan Heights. That's ridiculous.
It's suicide if you do.
It is. And so when people say they should give back the Golan Heights, you don't know what you're talking about.
That's right.
By the way, the Golan Heights, when the Syrians had that part of land, it was undeveloped.
That's right.
Might have been a couple of farms. It was primarily mines.
Yeah.
And the other thing the Syrians were doing on the Golan Heights is they were trying to cut trenches across the Golan Heights to drain all the water coming from Mount Hermon that runs down to the Sea of Galilee, to run all the water off into Jordan and Syria. In other words, to blockade all the water that belongs to Israel.
That's right.
They were trying to do that. By the way, that in itself is an act of war, to cut off another nation's water supply.
Right.
You go with us now up to the Golan, you'll see farms, you'll see fruit trees, you'll see wheat fields, olive factories. Yeah, I mean, an amazing place. But so Israel kept the Golan Heights, and in fact, they annexed it. Now, annexing land is what is traditionally done in war. We've done it as a nation. Come on. We went to war with Mexico. We annexed Texas.
Yes.
It's ours. We take it. I mean, it's like if Israel doesn't have a right to the land that they have, we have no right to Texas. We ought to give it back to Mexico.
Back to Mexico, that's right.
We went to war and annexed Texas. Come on. The rule, what's good for one person is good for another.
Let's keep the rules the same.
That's right. So if the West Bank should go to the Arabs, Texas should go back to Mexico. Just as it is. Everything that's built up on it, give it back to Mexico. You can't say it's right for us to keep this, but not right for you.
Right.
And so they annexed the Golan Heights simply because they realized we got hostile neighbors. By the way, there's rarely been a serious war up there on the Golan. It's come from Lebanon, but on the Golan itself. Now, then, in terms of what is known as the West Bank, and by the way, interestingly, it's called the West Bank because it's territory that's on the west side of the Jordan River.
That's right.
Now, here's what's interesting about that. The British mandate said that the new nation of Israel for the Jews was to have land on both sides of the Jordan River.
That's right.
It was supposed to have land on both sides of the Jordan River.
right.
So on that basis alone, there shouldn't be any question who the West Bank belongs
That's
to,
right. That's
because it's on the west side of the Jordan.
River.
In fact, not only should they have the West Bank, they should have 10, 20, 30 miles on the other side
That's
of
right.
taking land out of Jordan.
That's right.
what they should have
That's right.
by the treaties that were signed in the League of Nations.
And we read that whole thing out in a previous broadcast.
We read it in a previous broadcast.
It's there.
Go look
It's
it
a
up, the
document.
British Mandate. So the West Bank is a fictitious thing. What happened is that at the end of the War of Independence, the Jordanians controlled that land.
Right.
So let's go back and ask a question. Who were the first occupiers of the West Bank? The Jordanians.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Arabs were living there, Palestinians, if you want to call them that. By the way, they didn't call themselves Palestinians back then.
No, they didn't.
They were not called Palestinians. That's a name Arafat came up with. They were Arabs. Most of them thought of themselves as Arabs, like the Jordanian Arabs.
That's right.
And the Jordanians now controlled the whole West Bank. They occupied it at the end of the War of Independence. They were occupiers. But guess what? They did nothing to develop the people in the West Bank.
No, they didn't.
They did not develop the infrastructure. They built them no schools.
That's right.
They built no roads in the West Bank.
That's right.
They did not improve the water supply in the West Bank. They did not build one single hospital in the West Bank.
No.
And they did not give the Arabs living in the West Bank Jordanian citizenship.
That's right.
They simply occupied it.
That's right.
By the way, the Jordanians also occupied half of Jerusalem when that War of Independence ended. And a wall was built between the Jewish part of Jerusalem and the Arab part of Jerusalem. And all the holy places, the Temple Mount, the synagogues, on the Jordanian side, all the synagogues on the Jordanian side of that wall were destroyed by the Jordanians.
That's right.
Every single one of them. And from the high places in their part of the city, they would fire rifle shots at the Israelis living in their part of the city.
right.
And in fact, if you come with us again to Israel, we can have one of our guides that we know very well there, who grew up in that Jerusalem part when it was a divided city, and he remembers the wall being there, and that he could come up to the wall, but he couldn't go on the other side. Jews were forbidden
That's right.
so
To go to their most holy site.
to go to their most holy site. So what do we know? We know that when Arabs control half of the city of Jerusalem, they destroy Jewish holy sites. We know that. That's a fact.
That's right.
Don't tell me otherwise. We know it from that. We know it from what goes on now.
That's right.
And we know that when they're strong enough, they'll destroy the Christian holy sites
That's right.
as well. They have no respect for anyone's religion. They desecrated the Church of the Nativity when they took
When
it
they
over.
took it over. That's right.
So we know that. So the Jordanians were the occupiers of the West Bank. Let me ask you a question. Where was Arafat? The truth was, by the way, he was in Egypt. That's where he comes from originally. People don't know that. But anyway, where was Arafat saying, we want our freedom? Where was Arafat saying, we want a Palestinian state? Where was the PA? Where was the outcry, from 1948, 49 to 1967, where was the agitation among the Arab people for their own state? Where was the cry, we're Palestinians, we want our own state? It did not exist because it isn't the issue.
No, it is not.
It was simply a clever way Arafat created this idea of a suppressed minority because why? They hate the Jew. It has nothing to do with wanting a Palestinian state.
right.
It has everything to do with the fact we don't want Israelis to be here.
That's right.
Okay? So the Jordanians occupied all of that West Bank and there was no improvement. Look at the facts. Look at the facts. Israel now takes over the West Bank. Now, interestingly, they didn't annex it. There are many of us who think Israel
They should do it. Yeah.
should have annexed the entire West Bank. Let the world jump up and down and get bad. Annex it. Just annex it. It was ours way back in the beginning. It's rightfully ours now. We're going to annex it. And the only reason they didn't was because Israel's a democracy. Mm-hmm. And had they annexed it, the number of Arabs, Israeli citizens now would have been greatly increased by those Arabs in the West Bank.
That's right.
And now you would have had an Arab majority in a Jewish state.
That's right. That's right.
Interesting.
Because they don't kick them out the way the Arabs
They don't do like the Arabs who take over land and kick the Jews out.
right.
When Israel
No Jew
takes
is allowed to live in any of their territory. And as a matter of fact, if a Jewish person is riding in their car and somehow wanders and gets lost and ends up in one of their Arab neighborhoods, they will kill him. They'll shoot him and they'll kill him. But no Arab ever is concerned if they should get lost somehow and end up in an Israeli community, because they probably would help them to find their way out.
Think about it.
That is a fact that happens now, on this day and this hour.
Think about it. The Palestinians want a state in this so-called West Bank, but the state they want can have no Jews.
That's right.
They've already said
That's right.
no
They've
Jews.
already said that.
No Jews. But the Jews have a land in which Arabs can live. Mm-hmm. And if the Jews took over the West Bank and said, we annex it, it's ours, they will give citizenship to the Arabs. They will take care of the Arabs. But if the Arabs take over the land,
they're gonna expel all the
no
Jews.
Jew is allowed to live
You know,
there.
you almost want to tell the Israelis, annex it and then kick them all out.
And kick them all out.
But see, that's not their heart. That is not their heart, and that's not their way of thinking.
See, people have got to step back and say, wait a minute, something's
Who is
drastically
the enemy
wrong.
here?
Who are the wrong people?
That's
who are
right.
the immoral people? Who are the illegal people?
That's right. That's right.
And quit looking at some picture of a poor Palestinian living in a little thing and avoid looking at the rich Palestinian houses. We do that all the time in Gaza. And consider the fact, wait a minute, the Arabs want a land in the West Bank, they want a nation, and they've already said no Jew will be allowed, but if the Jews take over that land and own it, the Arabs will be allowed, and in fact the Jews will help them.
That's right. And
Now,
they'll thrive.
here's
They'll prosper.
Here's the result. Even though the West Bank wasn't owned by Israel, because it's supposed to be negotiated.
Right.
The thing is, come to the table and let's negotiate. Oslo was to say, come to the table and let's negotiate. And now we've come so far that when the Arabs were offered half of Jerusalem, Arafat said no. And they're so afraid of coming to the table and being forced to negotiate, now they want a unilateral state. It's about time the world stand up and say, you're insane, no, you're not going to get a state.
That's right.
And it's about time we say to the liberal professors in our university campuses and those crazy Christians who think somehow the poor Palestinians have a right. It's about time we say there's a right and a wrong in this case, and let's lay it down on the table and compare the facts, not hype, not what somebody extravagantly claims, not propaganda. Let's talk about the facts. Israel now controlled the West Bank. What did they do? They began to build roads.
That's right.
They began to build hospitals. I've got a list of it. I don't have it right now.
In Ariel.
But even among the Arabs, they built schools for the Arabs. Not a school in our Jewish settlement. They do that. But in the Arab towns, they provided money to build schools for the Arabs. They brought water into the West Bank, not so they could have water in their Jewish communities, so they could have water for all the communities. They brought electricity into the West Bank, not just so Ariel and other places could have electricity, so the Arabs themselves could have electricity. Before Israel was in control of the West Bank, there was no such thing as consistent electricity in the West Bank. Didn't exist. Ever since they've been there, every Arab can turn on a light switch in his village and he knows he has electricity. Why? The Israelis are providing it.
That's right.
Excuse me, folks. The Israelis have taken care of the Arabs better than the Arabs ever have taken of their own.
That's right.
That is the fact. Even now. Even now. Read about it just last week. A woman had a complicated internal physical problem that the Arab hospitals in the PA could not take care of, and the Israelis provided for her to come in free of charge, this massive operation to take care of her. Even now, in an Arab town, an Arab gets wounded, and many times they'll run to the Israeli settlement.
That's right, because they know they'll take care of them.
They know they'll take care of them. They know they're trained. They'll know you know. But you know, as a Jew, if you were wounded outside just had an accident outside an Arab town, if you went in that town, they would kill you. That is the fact.
Just like that. They wouldn't even think twice.
That is the fact, my friends.
That is the fact.
That is the fact. A wounded Israeli will be killed in an Arab town, but a wounded Arab, he knows he'll be taken care of.
That's right.
You know, our friend Roni Levy was on duty with the IDF, and he's standing on this hill overlooking these Arab farmers down there, and he said it all of a sudden struck him. He said, I'm standing here and I have my rifle. And there's Arab farmers down there, and they know I'm standing here, and they're working their crops. They are not concerned at all whether or not I will shoot them.
They weren't concerned
because they know I would never shoot them.
That's right.
But if they're Israeli farmers and a Palestinian Authority man shows up with a rifle, they all start watching him closely because he very likely will shoot them.
That's right.
Amazing. So after the 6-day war, the best thing that ever happened to the Arabs in the West Bank happened.
That's right.
The Israelis were here.
That's right.
The Israelis were here. And now you got a better life. You got a better education. Your economy begins to improve. You're taken care of. Interesting, in Jerusalem, for the first time in 2,000 years now, the Jews had all of Jerusalem.
Yep.
And what did they do? They immediately began to provide for religious freedom for everybody. Do you know you can go to Jerusalem right now and you have full religious freedom in Jerusalem?
That's right.
It's never been that way when the Arabs were in charge.
That's right.
And now it is. They respect the religious rights of the Christian, of the Jew, of the Muslim, of anyone else in Jerusalem. The Arabs do not do that. And yet the Arabs say, we demand half of the city of Jerusalem. And our State Department says, well, maybe we should consider that. Insanity, immoral.
That's right.
To give to a people group who destroy freedom, land and cities that
is actually Israel's capital.
Israel's capital, by all rights, always has been.
They may not have put the embassy there, but they'll tell you. That is the capital.
So what's going on right now in current events in Israel is the result of what happened after the 1967 war, when all those nations threatened to absolutely destroy and annihilate Israel. Right from the start, I would say, why would you ever give that land back?
That's right.
Now, Israel insists that if there's going to be a state called Palestine there, that it be demilitarized. Well, they have a right to. Excuse me.
Right.
You know, we have a Gaza down here we gave to Arabs, and they're firing rockets into it. We're not going to create another state where they fire rockets. And people say, oh, they won't do that. Then you're dumb and ignorant.
That's right.
Because that's what they pledged to do. The Palestinian Authority that wants to be a nation still has in its charter that it is chartered to destroy the nation of Israel.
That's right.
Come on, Mr. Obama, what don't you understand? Why is our government, especially our State Department, why are they so anti-Semitic and so pro-Arab? Why?
It is a mystery.
What is the mystery of why are
Isn't that like sleeping with the enemy?
I mean, look at it this way. The only democracy in the Middle East, the only democracy is Israel.
That's right.
And yet we're going to favor dictatorships? We're going to favor Saudi Arabia that is far from a democracy? Come on, in Saudi Arabia, you can't build a church. Now, the Saudis can come here and spend millions of dollars and build mosques. So you turn around and say, I have 20 million, I want to build a church in Saudi Arabia. You cannot build a church. And yet our State Department is all in favor of the Arab.
It must
Why?
Must be be that little black substance.
It must
called oil.
It must be the oil. It must be the oil.
Gotta
You
be.
know, president after president has pledged support for Israel and kind of hemmed and hawed on some things out of fear of the Arabs.
That's right.
What is it that we fear? And now we have a president who's absolutely trying to make friends with them,
That's right.
even though they vowed the destruction of one of our best allies
right.
in the entire world.
That's right.
Stop and think for a minute. What are you destroying if you destroy Israel? Do you know that the vast majority of medical breakthroughs come out of Israel?
That's right.
Do you know that the breakthroughs that enable the cell phone to work, the chips in your computer,
That's right.
all
the little small camera that
the little
goes into
camera
do
you
endoscopic
ingest and they
surgery
can
and all
look
that?
inside
Yep.
of you? Do you know that all those inventions come out of Israel? Think about it. There's a move to destroy the smallest group in humanity that has the largest
contributed the largest.
contribution
That's
to
right.
the benefit of humanity.
That's right.
Look at Nobel Prizes in physics and chemistry and medicine.
That's right.
Overwhelmingly Jewish people. In fact, I
And
think
they're a
that,
smaller people group.
yeah, less than 1% of the world
That's right.
contributes to the benefits of humanity
right.
more than any other people group, including the United States.
That's right.
And there's a move to destroy them.
That's right.
Could it be, Donna, that it has something to do with the fact that they are indeed the people of God?
I think
That there is a real God
That's right.
and there is a real devil.
Yes, there is.
And God said, out of all the peoples of the world, I choose Israel.
That's right.
Why? He's sovereign. He can make his choice. I choose Israel to be my people,
That's right.
and I will bless humanity
Through them.
through them. That's what God says. Go read it in your Bible.
That's right.
He will bless humanity
All the families of the earth will be
through
blessed through Abraham.
Abraham. And in fact, he has done that.
Yes, he has.
And then he says, and those who bless Israel
Will be blessed.
will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be under a curse.
That's right.
Those are the world geopolitical guidelines.
That's right.
I have a people called Israel. I will bless humanity through them. If you'll bless my people, you'll be blessed. If you come against my people, woe will come to you. Now, the Bible's very clear about that. And if we simply looked at the blessings, it's true. If we looked at the curses, that's true. Where's the Roman Empire today? Rome, who scattered Israel all over the world.
right.
Where are
No
they?
longer exists.
Where's the British Empire today? And Britain was the one that defrauded Israel of all her land.
land.
Come on. The British
right.
mandate said they were to have all this land.
That's right.
Britain unilaterally took 3/4 of it, gave it to Jordan, unilaterally, and from that point on, the British Empire ceased to exist. We are crazy if we think as a nation we can make decisions contrary to the support of Israel without this nation of America being absolutely split in two. If we split Israel, this nation will be split. Mark my words, it's Bible.
That's right.
It'll be split. You know, we were the guiding force behind Sharon giving up Gaza. 3,000 families, Jewish families who were hurting nobody, who took bought land that nobody lived on, desert land, and developed a thriving multi-billion-dollar agricultural business, were forced to leave their land as a gesture to peace, to give all of Gaza to the Arabs. We evicted these people out of their home, bulldozed their homes. Their synagogues were destroyed by the Arabs. And our government was part of that.
That's right.
And in the same week
Yes.
that they were being evicted out of Gaza, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. And the biggest evacuation of Americans ever took place, forcing people out of their homes to survive.
That's right.
And more homes were lost than in any other disaster.
That's right.
Now, you can say coincidence. I say the judgment of God. We cause people to be evicted, and in proportion,
That's right.
in proportion, think about that. You had to get 3,000 families out, then you're going to have to get 60,000 families out of your nation. In proportion, it's going to happen.
That's right.
And so when we look at what's going on, if we side with the creation of a Palestinian state in land that is no way theirs. It never was theirs. God said it belonged to his people. The League of Nations said it belonged to his people. The British Mandate said it belonged to his people. If we say that out of that land a new Arab state should be created, I am telling you
That's dividing the land.
that you have divided the land of Israel. And my Bible says, woe to you as a nation.
That's right.
You will be divided. And I don't say that with cheer, but there's no way that can happen without America being divided. What will it be? Another civil war? A class warfare? States pulling out of the Union like was going to happen back at the beginning of the... I don't know. I just know that if we divide the land of Israel, if we side with that, you will be able to trace it back 5 years, 10 years. I don't know how long it's going to take. This nation will be divided because we divided the land of Israel. Those are sobering thoughts.
Yes, they are.
Those are sobering thoughts. And all along, Israel has gone into land and provided blessing and benefit.
Wherever they go.
Do you know
they
when the
provide
Israelis left Gaza, over 1,000 Arabs lost their jobs?
That's
The
right.
Israelis employed over 1,000 Arabs.
That's right, they did.
And the last thing I read, those Arabs still don't have jobs.
That's right.
So not only did the Israelis lose their homes, many of them still don't have homes. We were visiting the Sapersteins.
Yeah.
We were in their house in Gaza. Remember that? Rachel's home there.
Yes. Yep.
And then this year we were in Rachel's temporary place.
Yep.
5 years later, they still don't have a home.
That's right. Almost 6.
Absolutely amazing. And yet the Palestinians are saying, we want a new state. And we want all the Jews kicked out of their homes. Actually, if the Palestinians could have it their way, they want 300,000 Jews removed.
That's right.
Well, President Netanyahu was smart,
Yes,
finally.
he was. Finally.
He stood up to President Obama and said, no way.
way.
No way are we ever going to remove 300,000 Jews. No way is the city of Ariel, the second largest university in Israel, no way is that city.
Which Arabs attend.
Yeah, and Arabs attend that university,
That's
by
right,
the way.
get educated.
No way is that city going to be removed. No way are some of the other communities. They're not settlements. They're communities with 8,000,
Thriving communities.
4,000, 3,000 families living in them.
That's right.
No way are we going to give those communities over to bloodthirsty Arabs who have only one goal, and that is to destroy the nation of Israel.
That's right.
It's time that we say to the PA, come to the table, sit down, and negotiate, and if you don't, we're not going to give you $1 more of our taxpayer
That's
money.
what it should be.
Not $1 more of our money will support you if you will not come and negotiate. This is the way we've got to start dealing with
That's
it.
right.
And if we don't, then the consequences will fall on us.
Yes, they will.
As a nation, well, the Middle East has everything you see to do with us.
Yes.
The Middle East very much is about what's going to happen in America's future. This is Pastor Don and Donna Long. We've been glad to have you with us today. Join us next week on Grafted In.